Okay, time is up. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. In particular, Im Jokhoi, His Excellency Im Jokhoi, Secretary General of Korea ASEAN. I'm so pleased to see him here again. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our session, New Southern Policy Achievement and Challenges over the past 2 years. My name is Seo Jung-in, the Executive Director for the Korea-ASEAN Commemorative Summit Preparatory Office. And I will be serving as your moderator today. ASEAN ROK Commemorative Summit will be held in Busan, November 25-27 this year, which will be the first largest multilateral summit to be hosted by our government. Also, on this occasion, we will have the first Korea-Mekong Summit on 27 in Busan this year as well. It is especially timely and important as 2019 marks 2 years of the announcement of our new Southern policy. I would like our distinguished panelists here to focus on new Southern policy related issues, indicative agendas issues. A, how leaders of the Asian region perceive and experience new Southern policy. B, how ASEAN Korea and ASEAN India can cooperate with each other in this regard. 3, C, what are the real tasks for the future? This is indicative agenda. As you know well, all of panelists here, they are very important and distinguished panelists, but they can talk whatever they would like related to new Southern policy or any other issues facing our region. I would like to explain our ground rule for the session. The session will be the 90 minutes. You will hear from one keynote speaker and 4 speakers. Speakers will have each more or less 30 minutes, respectively, followed by the less than 30-minute Q&A session. Now, moving along to our session, let me introduce our keynote speaker, His Excellency Jo Tan-shi, Union Minister for the Office of the State Councilor of Myanmar. His Excellency Jo Tan-shi served as ambassador to the permanent representative of the Union of Myanmar, New York. During his 10 years in UN, he served as Vice President of the UN General Assembly and several times. Also, I noticed that before the session, he was involved in the ASEAN when Myanmar joined in ASEAN 1997. Actually, he is a sort of ASEAN family, like all of us. Please welcome His Excellency Jo Tan-shi to the stage.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it is my distinct privilege to join this distinguished podium and the panel. Before I begin my remarks, I would like to thank both the Jeju Peace Institute and the Jeju Forum Organization Committee for inviting me to this forum for peace and prosperity. Peace and prosperity is something that all of us would want to see in the world. Peace and prosperity, dialogue, and international cooperation. These are the values which the government of Myanmar hold very dear. Because since our independence, we have to cope with the insurgency, which is now some 17 years and ongoing. Indeed, our newly launched Myanmar Sustainable Development Plan, MSDP, it is a comprehensive social, economic, and environmental policy reform agenda, articulates our long-term development vision. That is, a vision of peace, prosperity, and democratic Myanmar. In fact, the three pillars which underpinned our new MSDP, peace and stability, prosperity and partnership, people and planet, aligned perfectly with the new Southern policies, three pillars: people, prosperity, and peace. As an ASEAN member state, and as the moderator has mentioned, I've been involved in ASEAN since, Myanmar, or even before Myanmar became an ASEAN member, because I was one of the negotiators for Myanmar's membership to ASEAN. Myanmar fully supports the new Southern policy initiated by President Moon Jae-in in 2017. Myanmar believes that the new Southern policy will contribute to a deepening partnership between ASEAN member states and Republic of Korea, and also with India. And this can make an essential contribution to our common and noble endeavor of delivering peace, prosperity to our people and to our region. Distinguished guests, the keynote speech I'm going to make is in response to the title given, New Southern Policy, Achievement and Challenges over the past 2 years. Well, when you talk about New Southern Policy, I think in terms of prosperity, in terms of the cooperation in the economic and the trade sector. So my speech is based on that. But now when I came here, I found that this session is to cover aspect of foreign and security policy. So I have adjusted my speech a little, but not much. Peace and prosperity are intertwined. For ROK, peaceful Korean Peninsula is critical as it is for ASEAN. Let me now turn to the cooperation between ASEAN and ROK in the political and security fields. ROK has been cooperating with ASEAN through engaging in ASEAN-led mechanism, including the ASEAN Regional Forum, ARF, and ASEAN Defense Ministers meeting, ADM+. In fact, ROK became a participant in ARF since its inception in 1994. We're also happy to note that ROK has acceded to the Treaty of Amity and Cooperation in Southeast Asia, TAC. This is a treaty that ASEAN has great importance because it's enshrined the principles that we ASEAN members are dedicated to. ROK has strengthened its political and security cooperation since the announcement of the new Southern policy. Let me just touch on a few of them. It has successfully completed the co-chairmanship of the ARF intersessional meeting on disaster relief, ARF-ISM on DR. It co-chaired the ARF intersessional meeting on non-proliferation and disarmament, ARF-ISM on NPD, for the 2018-2019 circle. Active role in ADDM Plus, and currently co-chair of the ADMM Plus Expert Working Group on Maritime Security for the period 2017-2020. The point I'm making is that ROK has been cooperating with ASEAN in the political and security areas. And this cooperation extended by ROK is much appreciated by ASEAN. This cooperation is part of ROK's foreign and security policy, and as I said, we warmly welcome it. And ASEAN, in turn, has come out in support of ROK, both as a matter of principle and as a manifestation of our friendship on the most important challenges that confront ROK: peace and stability in the Korean Peninsula. So the ASEAN foreign ministers has issued a number of statements in support of ROK's position. The ASEAN foreign minister issued statement twice in 2017, expressing grave concern regarding nuclear tests and missile launches by DPRK. In 2018, they call for the complete, verifiable, and irreversible denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula, issuing statement once in March and again in April of that year. Again in 2018, ASEAN welcomed the successful conclusion of the historic summit between US and DPRK, and the ministers issued a statement encouraging US and DPRK to fully implement the joint statement in order to establish a stable and peaceful regime. They also issued another statement in the same vein in March 2019. The active participation and cooperation of ROK with ASEAN in the political and security fields have resulted in the readiness of ASEAN to play a constructive role contributing to the peace and stability of the Korean Peninsula. I will now continue with my original speech. Distinguished guests, our world today is confronted by countless challenges and uncertainties. We live in an age where the concept of globalization as a process of international integration is being challenged on many forms, on many fronts. Multilateralism is being challenged by a regression back to bilateralism. Liberalization is once again challenged by protectionism. External conditions are also negatively impacting many of the world's major economies. And while Asia's rise throughout the past quarter century has been nothing short of remarkable, global conditions are expected to become even less supportive for emerging markets and developing economies. Times are indeed changing. Despite challenges faced at home and abroad, ASEAN region has not swayed from its commitment to regional unity and prosperity, expressed so eloquently through ASEAN motto: one vision, one identity, one community. China and India and the 10 economies that make up ASEAN, of which Myanmar is a member, together represent a potential consumer market of more than 3.5 billion people, accounting for some $15 trillion and 20% of the global GDP. Clearly, ours is a region of rich opportunity. In this regard, I see the new Southern policy coming at a time when countries such as ours must seek to diversify our trade and economic relationship in order to keep up with the times. Mr. Moderator, 2019 marks the 30th anniversary of the establishment of the ASEAN ROK dialogue relations. I look forward to the convening of the ASEAN ROK commemorative summit in November this year, during which we will celebrate this important milestone. ASEAN ROK dialogue relations have made significant progress since 2009, when relations were elevated from comprehensive cooperation to a strategic partnership. Clearly, Republic of Korea is an important partner to countries that make up ASEAN. In terms of trade, ROK was ASEAN's second largest trading partner in 2017, with a two-way trade reaching US $149 billion, up 25.5% from the year previous. The same year, foreign direct investment inflows from ROK to ASEAN stood at US $6.2 billion, making ROK as ASEAN's third largest source of FDI. In accordance with the aim set forth within the new Southern Policy, ASEAN and ROK are now intensifying efforts to reach the ambitious, but I believe achievable, two-way trade target of US $200 billion. Steps being taken to achieve this goal include further liberalization of products under the ASEAN-ROK Free Trade Area, enabling greater contribution to micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises, and a strengthening of business-to-business relationship via the ASEAN-Korean Business Council. In consideration of this, I believe we can say that the current state of economic relations between ASEAN and ROK is strong and is likely to remain so for the foreseeable future. But our cooperation with ROK goes further than trade. The uniquely people-to-people values espoused by ASEAN are also in line with the new Southern Policy and its pursuit of a people-centered community. In this regard, I am pleased to note the increased contribution to ASEAN-ROK Cooperation Fund, AKCF, allowing the fund to continue its important work, enhancing people-to-people engagement under the ASEAN-ROK Cooperation Framework. Let me now to our bilateral relations with ROK. Myanmar established diplomatic relations with ROK in May 1975. This year marks the 44th anniversary of the establishment of the Myanmar-ROK relations. ROK is an important and valued partner for Myanmar, and I'm pleased to see this strong relationship expressed in the form of the blossoming trade relationship. According to official statistics, Korean investment in Myanmar accounted for $3.9 billion, spread across 155 projects as of April 2019. When combined, Korean FDI represent 5.9% of the FDI to Myanmar in the fiscal year 2018-2019. This in turn makes Korea our fifth largest investor. And I'm also happy to note that during the fiscal year 2007-2018, Myanmar's export to ROK increased by 16.3%, amounting to $379.11 million. Myanmar export to Korean continued to flourish in the first quarter of fiscal 2018-2019, increasing by 103.4% and amounting to $164.4 million US. In percentage terms, it is very impressive, but in the actual amount, it is still very small. Official development assistance has also increased steadily for the last 10 years. Under the new Southern Policy, it is my sincere wish that Myanmar and ROK may continue to accelerate our collaboration on many of the projects, creating such valued win-win outcome and bringing mutual benefit to both countries and people. Mr. Moderator, I will cut short, my statement to be within the 13-minute plus time that is given to me. I'd like to stress that Myanmar's southern seaboard, when connected with Thailand's thriving Eastern Economic Corridor, creates one of the world's most strategic economic corridors, offering access routes to the Indian and Pacific Oceans via the Bay of Bengal and the Andaman Sea, as well as the neighboring economies of Cambodia, Laos, Vietnam, and China. Let me stress, going back to the relations with ASEAN, that ASEAN remains a strong, a stable partner with ROK in matters also relating to security. I have mentioned them earlier. ASEAN member states, key partners in the Southern policy, maintain diplomatic relations with ROK, but also with the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. In this regard, ASEAN Regional Forum is one of the few multilateral mechanisms in which the DPRK is a member, providing room for key stakeholders, in addition to US and China, to exchange views on issues affecting the Korean Peninsula. Therefore, I see ASEAN as being a constructive player, helping to secure peace and stability throughout Korea Peninsula by providing a conducive yet neutral environment for discussion in support of DPRK's gradual reintegration into the international community. And it is no accident that the recent talks between US and DPRK are held in ASEAN member states. Mr. Moderator, like Myanmar, the Korea Peninsula can serve as a bridge connecting the economic achievement of Asia's southern region to our northern region, and in doing so, provide new opportunities for prosperity in Asia. The new southern policy also provides a greater opportunity for ASEAN member states to broaden their engagement in Korea and other key parties with a view towards bringing peace, stability, denuclearization to the Korean Peninsula. I believe that the peace and stability in Korea Peninsula will benefit not only the peninsula but Asia region as a whole. Thank you very much.
His Excellency Jo Tan-she, thank you very much for your very comprehensive statement opening our session, and then you set the parameters we will discuss related to the new southern policy. And I think just with the aid of the simultaneous interpretation, all the participants on the floor, you might have that rightly get the relevant information. And then now just I will move on to our panelists. To my left, our first panel is the, ladies and gentlemen, His Excellency Bilahari Kausiken. He is currently chairman of the Middle East Institute, an autonomous institute of the National University of Singapore. Ambassador Kausikan previously served as the permanent secretary of the Singapore Ministry of Foreign Affairs. He shared his view and perspective on foreign policies at his 2017 book over Singapore. It is Singapore is not an island. Views on the Singapore foreign policies. Former Singapore Foreign Minister Jayakumar told us Ambassador Bilahari is one of the finest minds in Singapore's public service. And then we are so honored to have such a distinguished panelist here on our sessions. And His Excellency Bilhari, just the floor is yours.
Of the ROK's new Southern policy. And I'll pose 3 questions and attempt to answer them. First, is there a need for a new initiative? Second, what is really new about the new Southern policy? And third, if not, how do we make it really new? So the first question, do we need a new initiative? My short answer to the first question is a clear yes. We are experiencing a time of far greater than usual uncertainty and flux in international relations. You all know why and what the uncertainties are, and I need not go into them. But at such a time, any initiative that brings like-minded countries closer together is to be encouraged. And the ROK and ASEAN are certainly like-minded. Of course, we may not agree on every particular detail of every issue, and we do not need to agree on every particular detail of every issue. But the ROK and ASEAN clearly are of like mind on the big things. It is in ASEAN's fundamental strategic interest to do what we can to promote the development of an omnidirectional balance of major and middle powers in Southeast Asia. The ROK must certainly be part of such a balance. Now, when I use the word balance, this is not a balance that is directed against any power. It is a state of multipolar equilibrium that maximizes maneuver room for ASEAN members. It is a dynamic and not static equilibrium, and ASEAN members must continually tilt one way or another in order to maximize their autonomy. The underlying principle is essentially very simple. A multipolar Southeast Asia opens up more possibilities for us than a bipolar or a unipolar Southeast Asia. Now, the range of possibilities would be significantly narrowed in a bipolar Southeast Asia, particularly if the 2 poles are in intense competition as they are at present. And the possibility of maneuver would disappear almost entirely in a unipolar Southeast Asia, irrespective of whether that single pole is China or America or Korea or Japan or India or Australia or almost any country you might care to name. And this is the basic concept underlying and the fundamental purpose of such ASEAN initiatives as the ARF, the East Asia Summit, and the ADMM+. The purpose is to encourage the constructive engagement of all external powers who want to constructively engage with us. And in this respect, the new Southern policy is entirely consistent with ASEAN's own objectives. Therefore, we welcome the new Southern policy, we welcome the ROK's new Southern policy, just as we would welcome a new Northern policy by Australia, or a new Eastern policy by India, or a new Southeastern policy by Japan, or a new Far Eastern policy by the EU, assuming, of course, that the EU has a foreign policy. Second question, what is really new about the new Southern policy? My short answer to the second question is, if we consider just the ASEAN component, is not yet clear. South Korea has, as you heard the minister say, a positive and substantive relationship with ASEAN for decades. And this year is the 30th anniversary of our dialogue partnership, and you know about the special summit in Busan in November. Economic ties are strong. Again, the minister has given you the statistics. I don't have to repeat them. South Korean brands like Hyundai, Samsung, Daewoo, LG, and others are household names in Southeast Asia with a reputation for quality. And at least among the young, and actually not so young, K-pop and Korean dramas are very popular. And I could go on listing the sources of Korean soft power, but I think my point is clear enough. My point is that the ROK has been entrenched in Southeast Asia for decades. It has had a strong and positive decades-long relationship with ASEAN as an organization, and strong and positive bilateral ties with individual ASEAN members for even longer. All this is good. But at the same time, precisely because these relationships are so strong and so positive, one can legitimately ask what is really new about the new Southern policy apart from the name. Now, I am aware that this administration, this Korean administration, has already taken a number of new initiatives, and the minister has again mentioned them. So I don't, you know what they are, so I don't have to list them all over again. In addition, ASEAN and Korea, we have various declarations, plans of actions, and other documents. They lay out many projects and initiatives in a variety of different policy domains, encompassing all three ASEAN community pillars. And I am sure in the run-up to the Busan Special Summit, more initiatives and projects will be rolled out as deliverables. Now, please don't misunderstand me. I am not denigrating the value of these projects, initiatives, and statements. New or old, they are all very welcome. My point is a different one. The question I ask myself is, are they just a collection of individual projects? Or do they cohere into something that is more than the sum of the various parts? I don't think they do, at least not yet. And we have decided to elevate ROK-ASEAN relations 9 years ago from comprehensive cooperation to strategic partnership. But what do we mean by the term strategic? Actually, strategic, in my opinion at least, is one of the most overused words in ASEAN's political diplomatic lexicon. Strategic is usually used by ASEAN as a synonym for important. And when we decided to call ROK-ASEAN relations a strategic partnership, it was primarily a means of signaling the importance we place on the relationship. And this is not insignificant, but we should be more ambitious in our understanding of what is truly strategic. Now, the third question. What must we do to make the new Southern policy really new? Now, if the new Southern policy is to be really new, individual projects, new or old, must become something bigger than the sum of various projects. Otherwise, the new Southern policy will just add to the list of projects. We must place individual projects into a coherent framework that is built around the long-term shared strategic objectives of the ROK and ASEAN. Such a framework should go beyond any particular policy domain, but integrate various policy domains so as to enable us to work together in a realistic and practical ways to systematically operationalize shared long-term strategic objectives. But do we really know what our shared long-term strategic objectives are? Our understanding of strategic objectives must go beyond generalities like peace, stability, or prosperity. While such generalities are not unimportant as aspirations, aspirations do not in themselves prescribe anything that would enable us to create a coherent, practical, realistic, and operational strategic framework for relations. The keywords are practical, realistic, and operational. For example, the peace and stability of the Korean Peninsula, again, as the Minister has said, is certainly a crucial general aspiration for our entire region. But have we ever had a practical, realistic, and operational discussion on what we can and are prepared to do together? If we have, I am not aware of it, and one way or the other, I have been involved in ASEAN for more than 30 years. Our discussions on North Korea only focus on what should be incorporated into statements. Diplomatic statements have, of course, their own importance, but still, statements are only statements. Surely, this is an issue that deserves deeper consideration. Now, I'm only using North Korea as an example. There are other issues that deserve deeper consideration. We need to identify and discuss them in a more than superficial way in order to reach a shared strategic framework. We may not always be able to agree fully on every issue, but a serious discussion will at least define the boundaries of what is realistically, operationally practical on any particular issue and set a baseline for a shared strategic framework. And such a discussion is long overdue, not just with the ROK, but with several other, indeed, I think most ASEAN dialogue partners. Too often we privilege form over substance. Sometimes it can't be helped, but not all the time. For example, there has been a suggestion from one ASEAN country that Kim Jong-un be invited to attend the Busan Special Summit. I am not in favor of it. It will just be a grand but empty gesture. It will distract us from what I consider the far more urgent task of our leaders giving clear directions to begin serious discussions of the kind I have briefly sketched, and thus it would be a wasted opportunity. Thank you for listening to me.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Billahari. You raised very intuitive and very interesting questions, all three relevant questions as well. Also, as to the direction of the new southern policy, also, yes, we know just many kind of the just new southern policy, and plus and minus as well. And in this regard, we have a very relevant just a panelist here, Park Jae-kyung. He is in charge of new southern policy. Actually, just he will, when he has his turn, he might address the point you raised. I think just that's why just we might have very good balanced just perspective as well. Also, your just 3 point of the how to in the direction of the new southern policy, maybe practical and operational realistic. I think that is very key word just to have in mind when we pursue new southern policy. Thank you very much for your comment. And our next guest, next speaker is Ambassador Menon. And he is a chairman, advisory board, Institute of the Chinese Studies. He was a former national security advisor to the Prime Minister of the India, and he served as the Indian ambassador to China, Pakistan, and Sri Lanka and Israel. He was chosen one of the top 100 global thinkers by the Foreign Policy magazine in 2010. He also wrote Choices Inside the Making of the India's Foreign Policy in 2016. Also, we look forward to his another book, India and ASEAN Geopolitics, the Past and Present. I think just August, September this year. We look forward to your new books as well. Maybe just you can share your just some very important just content just with us if you like here as well. Also, he either participated directly or indirectly the decisions, very important decisions made by the Indian government over his careers, such as 2005 to the 2009 U.S.-India nuclear agreement, India-China boundary agreement. Also, India's disavowal of the first use of the nuclear powers. And such a milestone decision are very important. And then Ambassador Menon, he was involved in such a very important decisions. I think that's why we have a very good or distinguished guest again here. And then floor is to you, ambassadors.
Thank you very much, and thank you for that very flattering introduction. Let me try and give you an Indian view of the new Southern policy, of what it's achieved and what the challenges are for it. Because when it was announced 2 years ago, it was very warmly welcomed in India for very obvious reasons. I think India has been following a policy that we used to call Look East, we now call it Act East under this government. And that's been, the aim really has been to connect to ASEAN, to Korea, to Japan, to China, because the entire focus of our foreign policy over the last 10 years has really shifted eastwards. This is also now where we do most of our trade, where we also think that actually in foreign and security policy terms, the areas is of primary interest to us and will affect our future, our own ability to transform India. It was also very warmly welcomed for the reasons that I think the Minister mentioned and that Bilahari mentioned, that it was seen as a diversification and a deepening of Korea's involvement with India and with the entire region, with Southeast Asia, with India. With a diversification not just in geographical terms, but also in terms of the content of the relationship, because the India-ROK relationship has grown very fast. Trade is growing at about 10%. It's still not enough. It's only $20 billion in 2017, which is really nowhere near its potential. But it got its momentum initially from the economic relationship. It was one of the first comprehensive economic partnership agreements we did, and we're in the process of revising it. But I think, like Bilahari mentioned, there was a feeling in India that it needs more, well, strategic content, that it needs more foreign policy, more security policy content. And because there are several shared interests in the relationship which make us much more ambitious. When Prime Minister Modi came, and he came to Korea within the first year of coming to power, and when President Moon appointed a special envoy and sent a special envoy to India within months of coming to power in May 2017, I think both sides were trying to signal how much more they want out of the relationship. And we've tried, I think, to put in place in the last 2 years a reasonable framework, several long-term agreements, several dialogues, which can, if we actually use them properly, enable us to add much more content, strategic content, as I said, to the relationship. Now, what are these shared interests that I speak of? Well, we are two nations which depend on trading. I mean, very few people realize that more than half of India's GDP is from imports and exports, is the external sector. In fact, just trade and merchandise goods is about 44% of India's GDP. Indians don't realize this, of how involved we are with the rest of the world, how the rest of the world is important. And most of that goes east. Korea is a very important partner. ASEAN's a very important partner. So we have a common interest in the security, maritime security in this entire belt of water, from the Pacific through all the way through the Indian Ocean. Whether you use the word Indo-Pacific or not, that's irrelevant. The fact is that this is one body of water and the security of it is important to both of us. And the result is we've therefore done joint naval exercises in the Indian Ocean. In October 2017, we did joint naval drills. In 2018, April, the Coast Guards actually did an exercise together off Chennai in the Bay of Bengal. And we've started building a relationship there where we certainly have, therefore that's one shared interest in maritime security and freedom of navigation and keeping these oceans open. The other, of course, is in the larger, in keeping protectionism down and making sure that the globalized economy stays global and that it stays as open as possible for both of us. And the third that I think we've both seen is, and Bilahari mentioned this, we certainly have an interest, like ASEAN, in seeing a multipolar future for Asia as a whole. Because something interesting has happened in the last 20 years. Asia is actually increasingly one geopolitical space. Missile ranges don't respect national boundaries, or you can't have, there is no missile which is limited just to Northeast Asia, or Southeast Asia, or South Asia. If you look at Asia today, there's a belt of weapons of mass destruction, continuous belt, all the way from the Mediterranean to the Pacific, from Israel to North Korea. This is one geopolitical space. We are both, Korea, India, and if you add China, Japan, others as well, we are highly dependent on the energy that comes out of the Middle East, of oil. In fact, the 4 biggest consumers of Middle East oil are really China, India, Japan, Korea. So we have a shared interest in energy security and in stability, actually, in West Asia. An interest which maybe is not shared to the same extent by those who export oil, who maybe want higher prices, but certainly the rest of us want it lower. So it would make sense, for instance, for us to do, and we've started doing joint research and development in energy, in ICT, software, because there is a natural affinity, there's a natural fit between, we have people who are trained, we have skills in basic sciences in India. Korea has tremendous experience in commercializing, taking to market, and actually building on taking these things and making them work economically, in an economic sense. So we are today working, whether it's bio, whether it's energy, whether it's, as I said, in ICT. We are now talking about joint R&D and commercialization of various technologies and trying to work on that together. Then, of course, there's a whole sort of core areas of interest where India and Korea have been trying to work on space, on civil nuclear energy, and on defense production as well, where I think there is a synergy which is natural between both the economies. So for me, this has been 2 years of successful, and for me, the biggest achievement is we now know roughly how to add strategic content. We have the various agreements, dialogues, etc. in place to do it. We actually have to now walk the talk. We have to actually implement this. But we, at least both sides are agreed on where we're going, and we have made some progress already in the last 2 years. But I do want to make another point. We are today in a geopolitical situation which not only makes this necessary, the new Southern policy and what we are trying to do together, but also makes it more difficult at the same time. What is this new geopolitical situation? For one thing, as we hear over and over again, there's much more intensified China-US contention. It's a much harder environment. And frankly, for a country like India, both sides are telling you, come to my side. And that's the last thing we want to do. As I said, we want a multipolar situation, just as, for the same reasons that Bilahari mentioned. In fact, frankly, what both the minister and Bilahari said, I could subscribe to every word of it and just substitute India where they said ASEAN, which is an interesting phenomenon. You see what Korea can do. The second, I think, geopolitically, when you look, and the reason I mentioned China-US contention is, therefore, it becomes even more necessary for all of us to diversify what we're doing, whether it's India, whether it's ASEAN, whether it's Korea. Therefore, I think we need to get out there and do much more of what the new Southern policy is promising. Secondly, if you look at the situation on the Korean Peninsula, whether it's denuclearization, whether it's the peace process, I think it will certainly, and certainly the peace process, which we've all welcomed, we've all declared denuclearization as our goal, but I think these will certainly be helped if there is a much broader engagement of the world, if it's not reduced to a function of great power politics. Because that great power politics will depend on the interests of the largest and the strongest, not necessarily on the interests of the peninsula. And that's something that I think, for me, therefore, it's important that we do something like a new Southern policy because of that. And the third thing that worries me, I'm not sure if you'd agree, and maybe you'll do this in the next session, is frankly, we're watching the fragmentation of the world economy, of the globalized world economy that we got used to before 2008, and of the WTO system, and increasingly, and our levels of ambition are shrinking. We started off trying to do RCEP, which I think we should do and do very quickly. But now we're talking about ASEAN plus 3. You know, each group is smaller and smaller and smaller, and that's exactly the wrong way to go. We are all the major beneficiaries of a globalized world system where trade investment flowed freely. And the best years for India certainly came in the best years of globalization. But today you're watching both China and the US are onshoring production. Different ends of the value chain, but they are both onshoring. They're taking more and more value added into their own economies rather than, again, that's not decoupling, no, because I don't think they can decouple. But it is a form of deglobalization which frankly makes the environment much harder for us, for India, for ASEAN, for Korea. And therefore, I think we therefore need to put in the economic content in the new Southern policy and to promote that. So overall, for me, the balance sheet is positive of the new Southern policy. I think I'm very hopeful of what it will achieve because it's based on reality and shared interests. And the timing is good and it's necessary. But it is a process. It's not going to be one summit, one meeting, one declaration. It's a process that I think we need to push, and we need to push very hard. But there is huge potential here, which is in the process of being realized. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Menon, and in particular for your assessment for the new Southern policy just by our government. And then, yes, timing is good. Also, yes, over the 2 years, we tried to be very productive just in that area, but still we need to go. But as you mentioned, just Korea, India, and Korea-ASEAN relations, we need to put more just meat to our relations, in particular from the strategic perspective, as Ambassador Billahari just told us. And then I think strategic dimension is very important at this function, at this time. Also, you mentioned that deepening and the diversification as a keyword. And then our new Southern, the goal of our new Southern policy is to just upgrade our relations with the ASEAN and India at the same level as the relations with the 4 major powers surrounding powers such as the US and China, Russia and Japan. I think just that's why just our government put an emphasis on the relations with the ASEAN and India, and then we will keep in mind your very useful suggestions. And our next speaker is Minister Marty, and then you know just him very well, and then Dr. Marty served as a foreign minister of the Indonesia from the 2009-2014. At that time, I was DG for the ASEAN. Just I met with him many times at the meeting. He has been cited as one of the most respected foreign policy and international security thinkers over his generation, both with Indonesia, in Southeast Asia, and in broader Asia-Pacific region. Also, he is the author of the critically acclaimed book Does ASEAN Matter? In Korean, ASEAN 중요한가? And I need the book as well. The Korean edition will be published with the enriched content of the ASEAN-Korea relations before the November Korea ASEAN Commemorative Summit. I think Korea ASEAN Center will publish it in a very timely manner. I look forward to the Korean version as well. And Dr. Marty, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I'd like to acknowledge the presence of our Secretary General in amidst us. Yes, I'm conscious of the limitation of time, and much of what I intended to say had been said by my colleagues. Let me just share 3 or 4 points, if I may, at this stage. One, the first point that I wanted to emphasize is to emphasize the importance of the new Southern policy. Actually, I would go as far as saying it's impossible to exaggerate, to over-exaggerate its importance for many reasons, for several reasons. One, I think it is in synergy, or it aligns with ASEAN's own beyond the region perspective. In the same way that the ROK now is looking beyond its own immediate environment and to look further down south, throughout ASEAN's 50 years of existence, it has been the pursuit of even greater connectivity and communication with countries beyond our region. All of you in this room are familiar with the ASEAN Plus processes, including the ASEAN Plus 3, the ASEAN Regional Forum, the East Asia Summit, the RCEP that we are now building on. In other words, it finds now a similar response on the part of the ROK, because ASEAN has, over the years, expanded its horizon beyond Southeast Asia, and now to see this be replicated or be positively responded to by the ROK is one that is aligned and very much synergized with ASEAN's own perspective. Needless to say, throughout all these efforts, the ROK's participation in all the various ASEAN-led mechanisms have been extremely important and central, as others have said. But the main philosophical point that I want to say beyond the statement of obvious in terms of mechanics is what such an outreach efforts represent. And this is the point that others have said before. In my view, it emphasizes the notion of common security. None of us can enjoy security and even prosperity in an either-or zero-sum manner. We must develop an architecture that is infused with the notion of common security, common prosperity, the indivisibility of peace. And I think South Korea's, the Republic of Korea's new Southern policy reflects well this reality. And as I said before, it is something that ASEAN over the decades have actively pursued. And it wasn't, it took a great deal of soul searching and deliberation within ASEAN to actually be a bit more ambitious to go beyond its own domain. Because there was a time when ASEAN was obviously very much confined to Southeast Asia in its ambitions, in its orientations. But over the years, as we consolidate, we began to develop all these beyond Southeast Asia modalities. The second reason why I think there is a sense of alignment, a sense of synergy between the new Southern policy, as I understand it, and ASEAN, is its emphasis on the community of people, prosperity, and peace, the so-called 3P, if I'm not mistaken, which exactly mirrors, and I stand to be corrected by the Secretary General, it seems to me it mirrors ASEAN's 3-pillar community, the economic community, political security community, and the socio-cultural community. And it's great to see the ROK in pigeonholing or in distinguishing the different efforts. It actually matches with ASEAN's own approaches. So there is greater chances of alignment and synergy as well. The third point that I think which makes me optimistic in the policies alignment or synergy with ASEAN is its emphasis on policy diversification in terms of, as I understand it, one of the main motives within ROK in pursuing the policy is to widen its diplomatic horizon, diplomatic options and choices. And as others have said before, ASEAN all throughout have been, nowadays we are so focused on China, China-US rivalries, on how it may impact on ASEAN. But actually, if you think about it, ASEAN over the 5 decades, we have dealt with other type of similar geopolitical tensions. During the Cold War, we have the then raging US-Soviet rivalries. And now, no doubt, in the future, there will be other nexuses, other bilaterals that we need to manage. I'm not sure how China-India relations in the future will be, or even relations with China and Japan. There are so many bilaterals that we need to manage, but ASEAN has a script in dealing with these issues. In the past, I used the term dynamic equilibrium to describe our approach, basically to ensure that we speak not of balance of power, rather of dynamics of power. We need to understand intent, not simply understand capacity. And by looking at intent, we realize and we come to the conclusion that ASEAN can matter. We provide a comfort level, a sense of comfort level, project a comfort level to the other countries, to have ASEAN to be in the driving seat role, to be in the centrality role, and therefore this notion of diversification of foreign policy orientation or of diplomatic horizon is one that finds resonance within ASEAN. But my fourth and final point is that in my view, ultimately, the question whether our judgment or evaluation, our response to the new Southern policy will depend on its relevance in terms of its actual impact. Because policy pronouncements or announcements is just the start. Then we need to ensure it actually delivers impact, be impactful and be relevant to our situation. And in this connection, I think both Korea and ASEAN, we must be so precise and robust and candid in identifying what are the nature of our problems that we are confronting today. Because otherwise, you can have all kinds of policy actions, action plans, visions, and etc., solutions looking for a problem. But we have to have a clear definition of what are the nature of the problem. For instance, and I don't want to bore you with several potential challenges. For instance, one obvious one that I thought is the issue of trust deficit. Our region, the Asia-Pacific, East Asia, Southeast Asia, Northeast Asia to some extent, we've all been beneficiary of a peace dividend. The decades of peace have enabled our economies to prosper. But amidst all this, we are still suffering from trust deficit. Northeast Asia, I believe, Southeast Asia, I believe, has some lessons to be learned, to be shared with Northeast Asia in terms of the changing of dynamics. Southeast Asia at one time, like Northeast Asia, was a divided region. There were two Southeast Asia of ASEAN and non-ASEAN countries. Conflict was raging, but it took 5 decades for us to build trust amongst us. Surely, there must be lessons to be learned, at least what not to do for Northeast Asia. And I must say in this connection, ASEAN's contribution to Northeast Asia have been significant, but I get the impression, but probably because I'm out of loop, I'm only looking from outside within, I get the sense there is a bit of a pause in ASEAN's potential contribution to Northeast Asian dynamics. And I will cite some examples. ASEAN plus 3. Prior to ASEAN plus 3, there was never a plus 3 in Northeast Asia. It was ASEAN 1997, 1998, by initiating the ASEAN +3, that planted the seeds of potential +3 mindset in Northeast Asia. And thankfully, now we have some kind of a very fragile habit of a 3 cooperation between China, Japan, and Korea. So we prove that we can be transformative. Likewise, in ASEAN Regional Forum, although in many cases it has been merely a convening power, but in some cases we have been able, when all was lost, when there was no more communication among the 6 parties, the ASEAN Regional Forum provided the only game in town where some kind of informal exchanges, some kind of informal occasion took place and gave birth, momentum to a more formal setting. I believe ASEAN now has become a little bit too mechanical in providing simply running commentary to what is happening in Northeast Asia. I believe we have to go beyond simply commenting, calling on this, positive on that. We have to be transformative. We have to be changing the dynamics. And hence, I believe that now the ROK have taken such courageous steps over the recent year in trying to change the dynamics. The 2 Koreas now impacting on DPRK and China, DPRK and US, and even Japan and DPRK, there's signs of some changing dynamics. Russia and DPRK. The ROK has been the propellant for a dynamic changing Northeast Asia. Now, in my view, Southeast Asia cannot simply sit still and simply giving a running commentary, oh, it's great, denuclearization. We have to be in there helping and supporting these efforts. And it takes courage, it takes a transformative outlook. For instance, ASEAN +1. Why is it with Korea, with the ROK? Can we envision a possibility where after the formal ASEAN ROK +1 process, there is a combined delegation where the delegation from the DPRK can also, this is during foreign ministers meeting, can also join in an informal retreat format where it's not only ASEAN +1, which is ROK, but ASEAN +1 with a little asterisk, where the DPRK, a la the sporting events that you have been able to convene a joint team. This is the kind of transformative outlook that I'm looking at our ASEAN colleagues to be coming up with. Because otherwise, we will be giving wonderfully written, wonderfully prepared running commentary of things that have happened in the past. We are driving using rear view mirror rather than looking at in front of us and shaping and molding. So in my view, again, Southern policy, wonderful. It replicates, it synergizes, it aligns with ASEAN. But the proof of is, we have to deliver. It's no use simply announcing and then take the announcement itself as being the end results. So it is time for our diplomats, for our policymakers to deliver policy leadership on this issue. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Minister. I was so impressed with what you said, and then actually I would like, I intended to ask such a question, but you maybe after this your presentation, but I don't need to ask that question again. Thank you for that. Also, as regard the last point of Korea-ASEAN plus North Korea format, such as is very transformative and the measures which will be initiated, which will be taken by the ASEAN, and then I look forward to such kind of very constructive role by the ASEAN, maybe just when the time is up. Also, our last speaker is Park Jae-kyung. He is a senior coordinator for the Presidential Committee on the New Southern Policy. He served as a director for the ASEAN Cooperation Division at Ministry of Foreign Affairs, as well as he posted to our embassy in Myanmar and the United States. I think just he is not one of the 100 distinguished think, but to be maybe in 5 years. I think just you might have another just contribution from him, and then give applause to him.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Thank you again for having me here. Indeed, it's extremely intimidating, actually, task to sitting together with such esteemed thinkers and practitioners of diplomacy here. I also appreciate Jeju Peace Institute for organizing the cluster sessions. Actually, this is the very first session. There are 2 more sessions on New Southern policy. I appreciate that. As one of insiders in policy making and implementation process, I should be humble and modest, particularly in assessment of the policy. And my mission here is to be listening carefully, and I'm very attentively listening to what other panelists are elaborating. And I will try to make my statement very brief. First, I would say ASEAN, Korea, India are natural friends, and there's a strategic convergence between them. With recurring competition and cooperation between US and China, these days may be described as period of competition. In addition to familiar issues, including maritime security like South China Sea and hardball negotiations on trade, the competition now enters a new phase surrounding state-of-the-art 5G wireless technology. It is certain that each ASEAN member state has very high stakes in the security and economic relations with both US and China. It is equally certain that ASEAN does not want to over-rely on any one major power and does not want to be forced to choose between the two. However, there's a dilemma, just as the Swahili saying that goes, when 2 elephants fight, the grass suffers, and when the same 2 elephants make love, the grass also suffers. Of course, there's no absolute easy fix for the dilemma, but we see that ASEAN centrality sometimes is useful in balancing major powers, or Parmati's term, maintaining a dynamic equilibrium in the region. No mechanism other than ASEAN-led regional initiatives has ever provided successful avenue for having countries in the region, whether it's big or small, sit together and talk with each other on a regular basis. Indeed, managing major power rivalry in the region became raison d'etre of ASEAN. I believe one of the elements which make ASEAN carry out the role is ASEAN's commitment to such principles as openness, inclusivity, transparency, and rule of law. The New Southern policy is also supporting such principles and respect for ASEAN centrality. I would like to quote President Moon Jae-in's remarks here. In March this year, on the occasion of centennial of March 1st independence movement, President Moon suggested that, I quote, South and North Korea create a community of peace and cooperation as denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula progresses, and it may result in an era of a peaceful economy serving to support economic growth across Northeast Asia, South and Southeast Asia, and Eurasia, end quote. President Moon's remarks are a quick wrap-up of the aspirational goal of the 3 major foreign policy initiatives, New Southern Policy and New Northern Policy, and the Economic Map Initiative for the Korean Peninsula. The 3 initiatives are expected to contribute to peace and prosperity of wider region of Asia in a mutually reinforcing manner, with no countries left behind. President Moon's strong belief is that peace and prosperity of the Korean Peninsula and neighboring regions are inseparable. Therefore, New Southern Policy is a regional cooperation initiative with advocating the principles of openness, inclusivity, and transparency. As such, the New Southern Policy is seeking synergy with other initiatives, including Belt and Road Initiative, Free and Open Indo-Pacific, and likewise, Korea's New Southern Policy and India's Act East policy has opened up more chances for cooperation between the two countries. Second, I would like to talk a little bit on the peace pillars. The number one is Korean Peninsula, and the number two, the trans-border non-traditional security issues. First, the Korean Peninsula. Of course, this is one of the long-lasting flashpoints in the region. And ASEAN's concern of the nuclear weapons and missile has become something of a big one, no longer other people's affairs. As one of the close watchers of ASEAN, I have analyzed that a couple of events made ASEAN see the Korean Peninsula issue more seriously. Until late 2017, North Korea repeatedly tested nuclear weapons and ballistic missiles with range of several thousand miles from North Korea. So a perception grew up among the public that ASEAN is also within a range of attack from North Korea. An equally alarming event happened in February 2017 when Kim Jong-nam was assassinated at the airport in KL, Malaysia. From this case, the citizens of ASEAN were used in the crime, and the crime scene was in the territory of ASEAN. So this had provided serious alarming call to ASEAN and had led to more strict position in dealing with North Korea in various ways, including tight implementation of UN sanctions. But from 2018 onwards, relations between ASEAN and North Korea are thawing, thanks to dramatic situational change on the Korean Peninsula. Of course, direct talks between US and North Korea, as well as inter-Korean talks, are fundamental and essential in dealing with the nuclear issue. Yet again, ASEAN may be able to provide room for the settlement of the issue by creating more conducive environment for talks. Thus, it is not a surprise to see that the 2 rounds of summit meetings between US and North Korea held in ASEAN member states. ASEAN has maintained its unity for over 50 years through its own unique way of addressing issues of concern. It's the so-called ASEAN way, such as consensus-based one in decision-making, non-confrontational, and informal nature in discussion, and engagement instead of finger-pointing. We have learned how ASEAN has handled such sensitive issues of the Southeast Asia for the past few decades through the ASEAN way, including the sensitive issue in Myanmar. We have learned how the ASEAN way has played out in keeping Myanmar on the right track towards reform and democracy. With further progress of denuclearization and permanent peace process on the Korean Peninsula, North Korea may be encouraged to be part of East Asian community building process. I respect Marty's comment on this respect. That may also evolve into North Korea's participation into more ASEAN regional frameworks, adding additional ones to existing ARF. And I would also point out that peace on the Korean Peninsula will in turn provide ASEAN and India new opportunity in expanding partners for economic cooperation, including trade and investment. One final quick point is that under New Southern Policy, Korea would like to make concerted efforts with ASEAN and India in dealing with non-traditional transborder security threats in the region. Such issues include maritime safety, terrorism, violent extremism, cybercrimes, and so on. With regard to maritime safety, we see particularly the issue of maritime plastic debris in countries like Indonesia, Philippines, and Vietnam. With regard to cybersecurity issue, we see capacity building projects for countries in the region. No country can tackle the emerging cyber threats on its own. We need to work together to strengthen collective resilience against such threats. Thus, we are now engaging with recent initiative to set up a capacity building center in Singapore. The ASEAN-Singapore Cybersecurity Center of Excellence, to be launched in October this year, is expected to boost ASEAN's capabilities to tackle cyber threats. Non-ASEAN partner countries as of now include US, Japan, and India, as well as Korea. The rationale that Korea pays attention to these non-traditional security issues of ASEAN is that security and safety of both sides are inseparable. Security on one side is directly or indirectly affecting the other. I better stop here, and thank you for listening.
Thank you. Thank you very much. for your comment. Yes, actually, we are racing against the time. I thought I can reserve 30 minutes for the Q&A session, but we don't have enough time. But I will have just one very quick question and answer on the floor. Okay, just Professor Che, you have the floor. Please identify yourself and organization, and then to whom
Thank you.
you would like to ask.
Thank you. My name is Wong Gi-cho. I'm from Korea National Diplomatic Academy. The panel presentation is really insightful. I learned quite a lot. I'd like to make one comment and one question. The first comment is that I agree with the panelists' presentation that Korea and ASEAN and Korea-India shares lots of interest. We have shared interest. So in that sense, we are like-minded. But I mean, Ambassador Bilahari said that ASEAN's preference is multipolar world. And also, I think India has some sort of that kind of diplomatic and foreign policy direct orientations. But to my knowledge, Korea is one of the largest beneficiary of multilateral system rather than multipolar. So we are American ally. So we have been grown out of American leadership-based multilateral system. So our preference lies not in multipolar world. That's my understanding. And my question is to Ambassador Bilahari. You provided lots of compliments about Korea's effort embedded in certain policy toward economic and diplomatic diversification. But I'm a little bit confused about what you mean diversify in that sense when you talk about multipolar thing. I mean, do you interpret Korea's effort to diversify away from American-based leadership system, or diversify something else based on the American leadership-based this multilateral thing? So I'd like to raise a question to you that what do you mean, what is from your own perspective, how do you see Korea's efforts to diversify? Is it something we try to alter the American hegemonic system, or I mean, do you see that we are approaching away from US to China or something? So what is your own opinion about that? Thank you.
Okay, I'll be very brief. First of all, there is no contradiction between multipolarity and multilateralism. They actually complement each other. Second, the era when there was only one pole, that means the American-dominated era, was historically very short and very exceptional in history. Perhaps it was only from 1989 or 1991 to around 2009, 2010. That's a very exceptional period. For most of 20th century or even before, there were multiple powers. Most of 20th century was a bipolar world, but within the two poles, there were subpoles. So we are coming back to a historically normal period after a historically abnormal period of about only 25 years. And it is, to me, quite natural that Korea would want to diversify. And where else to diversify, right? Yesterday, I attended the first section because I'm quite interested in North Korea. And I was struck because two speakers in the session on infrastructure between North and South Korea referred to Korea as an island because you are surrounded. And I was very puzzled because now I said maybe you are naturally a continental power that looks out, that looks northwards. But actually, the seas are connective. So if you are going to look south, it is quite natural. That's my answer.
Got it? Yes, we don't have enough time, but just you complete?
No, I'm finished.
I finished. And then actually to enjoy the presence of our distinguished panel, even though we don't have enough time, just we will have one or two more questions, if you don't mind. And then actually another session will start maybe in 20 minutes, and we can enjoy maybe 10 minutes again, 10 minutes more. I think just with my authority. Okay, you can leave. Okay. Okay. All right, just. Any questions? Any questions? 사진? 아, 사진. photograph. I'm sorry, just actually just keynote speaker. He should leave now, and then just we should stop here, and then we need a photo session for him. Otherwise, this is not so good. And let's have the photo session.
Okay, we have to stand.
Sorry, I think just we need one more questions. You can, Ambassador Yoon, you can have the question because you came from the just U.S. and. Okay, and then is there any questions from the floor? Kawi, in the back side, you can have a chance. No? All right. And then, any other questions? Secretary General, former Secretary General of Korea ASEAN Center, Ambassador Kim Young-sun, you can have a chance to ask your questions. No?
ASEAN 1 month ago. I was ambassador to ASEAN 1 month ago. I have a simple question to Ambassador Bilahari and then, Minister Mati. When I was in Jakarta, I noticed that in Jakarta we have ASEAN CPR mechanism, ASEAN +1 mechanism, ASEAN +3 mechanism, EAS mechanism, but we don't have ARF mechanism. I want to ask you why you didn't make that kind of mechanism in Jakarta, because I noticed that the ARF is very useful, particularly for us. It is a platform for North Korea to engage. But in practice, North Korea attend ARF meeting once per year. So we have to engage North Korea in a regular way. So ARF mechanism in Jakarta is on way. As Ambassador Bilahari mentioned, practical, realistic, and operational way. Thank you.
Well, congratulations, Excellency, for being able to recite, at least remember all the different processes that we have in Jakarta, because it often can be quite complicated what we have. But you are quite, well, my response, actually, Excellency, is simply to recognize that there is what's needed probably is not necessarily yet another mechanism, because ASEAN Regional Forum is a forum. We have the intersessional sessions. The possibilities are there, but it's just a matter of the comfort level to actually invoke and utilize the forum. I hate to see a formal announcement that we are going to have a mechanism in Jakarta for the ASEAN Regional Forum, yet that is underutilized and under-attended. So I think what is needed is actually basically to begin what we already have, the ASEAN Regional Forum, the ambassadors are in Jakarta, the CPR is in Jakarta. It's just get on to the business of actually having meetings. Because otherwise, if you wait for some formal moments, for yet another modalities to be set up, I'm sure there will be wonderful committees to be set up by ASEAN to study the pros and cons of having this another process. I think it's a way simply to recognize what we are not short of infrastructure. We are not short of modalities. What we are short of, I think, is the confidence and the willingness to utilize what we already have. I mean, the CPR, for instance, in my view, is one of the most, the potential for it is far more than what it has become recently. For instance, in the area of crisis management, when events develop. But my short response to your question, Excellency, is that I don't think necessarily what's needed is yet more formal mechanism. It's simply for the countries concerned to just get into the business of actually gathering themselves in Jakarta if they so wish. There's nothing that, in my inclination is, if something is not disallowed, if something is silent, if ASEAN is silent on certain modality, it doesn't mean that you cannot do it. All it needs is someone to take the initiative. And hence, for instance, there is this thought to have an ASEAN, when we have the commemorative summit here in Korea, for instance, that there was a thought to have the leader of the PRK invited. But this is something that can become to something to be discussed among ASEAN level, at the lower level. The ASEAN Plus with an asterisk, as I mentioned before, ASEAN officials in Jakarta. But, I mean, it's not the mechanism. I think it's more the mindset that is needed, yeah.
Mine would be even shorter. I 100% agree with everything Pak Mati has said.
Very short, very practical, like a typical Singaporean and effective way. And then, ladies and gentlemen, just finally we come to the end of this session. I would like to say thanks again for all the speakers for their presentations and the two guests for your participation. I wish you all a productive sessions. Thank you very much.